You know what they say about military academies across the galaxy? They're tough, they're brutal, and they'll break you down just to build you back up stronger. Well, whoever they are clearly never set foot on Phobos Delta, because this place doesn't just break you down, it grinds you into cosmic dust and uses what's left to fertilize the pain gardens. Welcome to the Galactic Military Academy's Advanced Combat Training Facility, where dreams come to die and nightmares come to learn proper marksmanship. Perched on a dead moon orbiting a deader planet, this charming little institution has been churning out the galaxy's finest warriors for the past century. And by finest, I mean most psychologically scarred, but still functional enough to hold a plasma rifle without crying. The morning alarm screamed across the barracks at exactly 0500 hours because apparently the universe has a sick sense of humor. Cadet Amber rolled out of her bunk with the practiced grace of someone who'd learned that hesitation meant push-ups, and lots of them. Around her, the other cadets were already moving. Well, most of them were moving. Helix was doing that weird crystalline shimmer thing they did instead of sleeping, while Grok was performing what could generously be called morning stretches, but looked more like a mating dance for very angry lizards. "Rise and shine, meat sacks!" The voice that boomed through the barracks could strip paint, and had probably been used for that exact purpose. Commander Brutus stood in the doorway like a human-shaped natural disaster, all muscle and malice, wrapped in a uniform that had seen more action than a diplomat's excuse handbook. Today's the day some of you get to find out what failure tastes like. Spoiler alert, it tastes like blood and regret. Amber suppressed a yawn and fell into formation with the others. 6 weeks of this routine had taught her exactly how much enthusiasm was required, just enough to avoid extra laps, not enough to be volunteered for special training exercises that usually involved explosives and questionable safety protocols. The Academy didn't discriminate when it came to species. Oh, sure, they'd take anyone, provided you could survive the entrance exam, the psychological evaluation, the physical trials, and the small matter of not dying during orientation week. The current batch of cadets represented 8 different star systems and twice as many ways to accidentally offend someone's cultural sensibilities. Helix stood to Amber's left, their crystalline form catching the harsh artificial light and throwing rainbow patterns across the walls. They were from Nexus Prime, where thinking too hard about quantum mechanics was considered a recreational activity. Next to them, Grok flexed muscles that belonged on a construction mech, not a sentient being. His homeworld was Dracon 5, where the gravitational pull was strong enough to crush diamonds, and the local wildlife considered plasma cannons a light snack. Then there was Lila, who wasn't entirely sure if she was made of energy, matter, or just really committed to the aesthetic. Her species had transcended physical form about 1,000 years ago, but apparently still felt the need to attend military academy because, and I quote, "ascending to a higher plane of existence gets boring after the first few centuries." Fair enough. Borin represented the Shizu. No, that's not a typo. His people literally called themselves the Rock People, and somehow made it sound intimidating. He was built like a mountain decided to go to the gym, with skin that could probably deflect meteors and a personality to match. Sweet guy, really, once you got past the whole, looks like he could bench press a small moon thing. And then there was Amber, human, from Earth. That little blue-green marble tucked away in the unfashionable arm of the galaxy, where the locals had only figured out faster-than-light travel about 50 years ago, and still got excited about reality television. In a lineup of evolutionary masterpieces, She looked about as threatening as a particularly determined houseplant. "Listen up, cadets!" Brutus stalked down the line like a predator, sizing up his next meal. "For 6 weeks, you've been playing soldier. You've crawled through mud, climbed walls, and pretended to understand tactical doctrine. Congratulations! You've mastered the art of not dying immediately. But today?" He stopped directly in front of Helix, whose crystalline surface actually dimmed, which, for their species, was the equivalent of nervous sweating. "Today, we find out who among you has what it takes to be more than just expensive cannon fodder." The infamous final test. Every cadet had heard the stories whispered in the mess hall and shared during the late-night guard duty. In 20 years of operation, not a single cadet had passed the Academy's ultimate trial. Not one. The closest anyone had come was a Voltarian named Krex, who'd lasted 8 seconds before the automated systems had turned him into what the medical bay politely termed a learning experience. "The crucible chamber," Brutus continued, savoring each word like a fine wine paired with existential dread. "Automated defense systems, real ammunition, live fire exercise designed to test everything you think you've learned about combat, survival, and the thin line between courage and stupidity." His gaze swept across the formation, lingering just long enough on each cadet to make them question their life choices. "The good news is, the medical bay has excellent regeneration technology. The bad news is, you have to be alive enough to use it." Amber felt a familiar tingle at the base of her skull. Not fear, exactly, but something her instructors back on Earth had called situational awareness, with a side of adrenaline. She'd been the worst performer in their group by every measurable standard. Last in the obstacle course, lowest scores in marksmanship, and her tactical assessments read like poetry, written by someone who'd never seen a battlefield. But here she was, still standing, while 3 other cadets had already washed out after accidents that were totally accidental and absolutely not the result of pushing themselves beyond their species' physical limitations. "Sir?" Grok's voice rumbled like a landslide with anger management issues. "What's the pass rate for this exercise?" Brutus smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the kind of smile worn by hurricanes and tax auditors. "Pass rate? Oh, that's adorable. You think this is about passing?" He turned to address the entire formation. "This isn't about passing, cadets. This is about learning. Some of you will learn that you're stronger than you thought. Others will learn that the universe has a sense of humor, and it's not particularly kind. A select few might even learn something useful about combat under pressure. And if we die?" This came from Lila, whose energy form flickered with what might have been concern, or possibly just a minor power fluctuation. "Then you'll die educated," Brutus replied cheerfully. "Your families will receive a lovely certificate and our sincere condolences. Plus, your names will be added to the memorial wall, which is always nice for posterity." The memorial wall? Amber had walked past it every day for 6 weeks. Names carved in polished stone representing cadets who'd pushed too hard, aimed too high, or just had really, really bad timing. The list was longer than she'd expected, and shorter than she'd feared, which somehow made it worse. "Now then," Brutus clapped his hands together with the sound of thunder getting its attention. "Who wants to go first?" "Don't all volunteer at once. We haven't got all day, and the chamber's automated systems get cranky when they're kept waiting." Silence stretched across the formation like an awkward pause in a diplomatic negotiation. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Even Helix had gone completely transparent, which was their species' equivalent of hiding under a blanket and hoping the monsters went away. No volunteers. Brutus shook his head with mock disappointment. How surprising. And here I thought you were all eager to prove yourselves. His smile widened. Fine. We'll go in order of performance scores. Worst to best should make for an interesting educational progression. Every head turned toward Amber. Because of course they did. 6 weeks of consistently finishing dead last in every category had earned her the dubious honor of being first in line for what was essentially legalized suicide with educational benefits. She stepped forward, because that's what you did when your number was called, and the alternative was court-martial. Ready, sir? Brutus studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Are you, Cadet? Are you really? He circled her slowly, like a shark who'd discovered something interesting floating in the water. Tell me, what makes you think you can succeed where 20 years of superior specimens have failed? The honest answer was that she didn't think she could succeed. The smart answer was probably some combination of determination, training, and tactical superiority. The answer that came out of her mouth was, because someone has to, sir. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't false confidence or misplaced optimism. It was just true. Someone did have to succeed eventually, didn't they? The law of averages, probability, basic statistical likelihood. They all suggested that sooner or later, someone would figure it out. And if it wasn't her, it would be someone else. And that someone else would have to watch her fail first. Brutus blinked. Just once, but it was enough. Interesting answer, Cadet. Let's see if you can back it up. He gestured toward the corridor that led deeper into the facility. After you. And cadets? He addressed the rest of the formation. Pay attention. You might learn something useful. Or you might just learn what failure looks like in high definition. As they walked through the corridors of the academy, Amber couldn't help but notice the way the other cadets were looking at her. Not with pity. Military training had beaten that luxury out of all of them weeks ago. Not with fear either, though there was certainly some of that. No, they were looking at her with something closer to curiosity. Like she was an equation they couldn't solve, or a puzzle missing crucial pieces. The thing was, they weren't wrong. Amber had spent 6 weeks being the worst at everything, and she'd done it so consistently that it had become almost artistic. But here's the thing about being consistently bad at everything. It takes a lot of effort to maintain that level of mediocrity. It takes focus, discipline, and careful attention to detail. All things that, when applied properly, could be quite useful in other contexts. The crucible chamber waited at the end of the corridor like a patient predator. Through the reinforced viewing windows, Amber could see the killing field that awaited her, a space roughly the size of a basketball court, filled with obstacles, cover positions, and enough automated weapon systems to level a small city. The walls were scorched with blast marks from previous attempts, and the floor showed telltale signs of hasty cleaning after what were diplomatically termed biological incidents. Second thoughts? Brutus asked, his hand hovering over the activation controls. Amber looked at the chamber, then at her fellow cadets pressed against the viewing windows, then at the commander who'd spent 6 weeks trying to break her spirit with creative applications of military discipline. She smiled. Not the nervous smile of someone facing impossible odds, but the genuine smile of someone who'd just realized the punchline to a very long joke. "No, sir," she said. "I'm good." And as the chamber doors sealed behind her with the finality of a tomb, Amber couldn't help but think that this was going to be fun. The crucible chamber had the ambiance of a nightmare designed by someone with a PhD in applied terror and a minor in interior decorating. The walls were lined with enough firepower to make a battleship jealous, and the floor was crisscrossed with pressure plates that probably weren't there for show. Amber stood in the center of it all, looking about as concerned as someone waiting for a particularly slow elevator. "Attention, Cadet!" the chamber's AI announced, in a voice that sounded like honey drizzled over broken glass. "You have entered the Advanced Combat Simulation environment. Please state your name for the record." "Amber," she replied, rolling her shoulders in a casual stretch that somehow managed to look like she was limbering up for a light jog rather than potential death. "Thank you, Cadet Amber. This exercise is designed to test your combat reflexes, tactical awareness, and survival instincts under extreme duress. The automated systems will commence firing in 30 seconds. Any last words?" Through the observation windows, Brutus leaned forward with the interest of someone about to witness either a miracle or a very educational disaster. The other cadets had gone silent. Even Grok had stopped his nervous tail twitching, which was saying something. "Yeah," Amber called out cheerfully. "Can you make it challenging?" If the AI had possessed facial features, it probably would have blinked in confusion. As it was, there was a slight pause before it responded. "I beg your pardon?" I said, "Can you make it challenging? I mean, if this is supposed to be the ultimate test, I'd hate for it to be over too quickly." In the observation deck, Helix's crystalline form had gone completely clear, their species equivalent of fainting. Brutus, meanwhile, had developed what medical professionals would term concerning facial discoloration, while his knuckles had gone white from gripping the railing. "Cadet," the AI said with mechanical patience, "perhaps you misunderstand the nature of this exercise. The automated defense systems are loaded with live ammunition, plasma rounds capable of melting through reinforced steel. The casualty rate for this exercise is 100%. "Yeah, I heard." Amber waved dismissively. "Look, I'm not trying to be difficult here, but I've been looking forward to this for weeks. 6 weeks of mediocre performance scores and disappointing everyone's expectations. A girl's got to have some fun eventually." The countdown timer hit 10 seconds, and weapon systems throughout the chamber began humming to life with the sound of barely contained violence. Energy cells charged, targeting systems calibrated, and somewhere in the bowels of the facility, ammunition feeds clicked and whirred as they prepared to deliver roughly 30 different flavors of instant death. Amber stretched her neck, cracked her knuckles, and assumed what could generously be called a combat stance, if you squinted and had never actually seen combat before. She looked relaxed. She looked ready. She looked like someone who'd just remembered something hilarious and was trying not to laugh. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, commence exercise. The first plasma bolt screamed out of a wall-mounted cannon at roughly Mach 3, aimed directly at Amber's center mass. It was a beautiful shot, perfectly placed, impossible to dodge, and carrying enough kinetic energy to punch through a tank. In the observation deck, Lila actually turned away, unwilling to watch the inevitable conclusion. Amber moved. No, that's not quite right. Amber didn't move. She flowed. One moment, she was standing directly in the bolt's path. The next, she was somehow 3 feet to the left, and the plasma round was sailing harmlessly past her to impact the far wall in a shower of sparks and molten metal. "Huh," she said, sounding mildly impressed. "That actually had some zip to it." The AI, apparently deciding that the first shot had been some kind of statistical anomaly, immediately fired again. This time, it was a burst of 3 rounds from different angles, designed to eliminate any possible escape route. It was the kind of tactical solution that had ended many promising military careers and several not-so-promising ones. Amber ducked under the first round, sidestepped the second, and, well, this is where things got interesting. The third plasma bolt was coming in fast and low, aimed at her legs with the clear intent of removing them from the equation permanently. There was nowhere to dodge, no cover to reach, and absolutely no time to think of clever alternatives. By all the laws of physics, ballistics, and common sense, that shot should have connected. Instead, Amber reached out and caught it. Not deflected, not redirected, caught, with her bare hand. Like someone had tossed her a softball instead of a bolt of superheated plasma capable of melting through spacecraft hull plating. The bolt sat in her palm for a moment, crackling with energy that should have reduced her to component atoms. She looked at it with the mild interest of someone examining a particularly unremarkable pebble. "You know," she said conversationally, "back home we call this aggressive negotiation." Then she closed her fist, and the plasma bolt simply stopped. No explosion, no release of energy, no dramatic light show. It just ceased to exist, like she'd snuffed out a candle. In the observation deck, absolute silence reigned. Helix had gone beyond transparent. They were now actively refracting light in ways that suggested their species' version of a complete mental breakdown. Grok's jaw had unhinged, revealing rows of teeth that were apparently just for show. Lila's energy form was flickering like a fluorescent bulb with commitment issues. Brutus, meanwhile, was doing a remarkable impression of a man whose entire understanding of the universe had just been fed through a shredder and then set on fire. "What?" he managed in a voice that sounded like he'd been gargling gravel. "In the name of all that's holy was that?" The AI seemed to be having its own existential crisis. Weapon systems throughout the chamber had gone silent, as if the automated systems were taking a moment to reconsider their life choices. When the voice finally returned, it carried a note of what could only be described as electronic bewilderment. "Error. Error. Please stand by while combat parameters are recalibulated." "Oh, come on!" Amber called out, sounding genuinely disappointed. "Don't stop now." "I was just getting warmed up." The recalibration took exactly 18 seconds, during which time the chamber's targeting systems performed what could only be described as the mechanical equivalent of nervous muttering. When they came back online, it was with a vengeance that suggested the AI had taken Amber's casual dismissal of physics somewhat personally. This time, the weapons didn't fire individually. They fired in sequence, creating a pattern of overlapping fields of fire that would have challenged a fully armed battle mech. Plasma bolts crisscrossed the chamber in streams of lethal energy, each one precisely calculated to intersect with every possible escape route. It was beautiful, in the way that avalanches and nuclear explosions are beautiful. Absolutely devastating and utterly inescapable. Amber laughed, not the nervous laughter of someone facing impossible odds, or the manic giggles of someone whose sanity had finally snapped under pressure. This was the genuine, delighted laughter of someone who'd just been presented with exactly the challenge they'd been hoping for. She moved through the storm of plasma fire like she was dancing to music only she could hear. Bolts that should have vaporized her passed so close they singed the fabric of her uniform, but never quite managed to connect. She spun, ducked, twisted, and leaped with a fluid grace that made the whole thing look choreographed. And then, because apparently catching one plasma bolt hadn't been impressive enough, she started catching them again. Not just deflecting or dodging, but actually plucking them out of the air like deadly flowers. Her hands moved in a blur, snatching energy bolts that were traveling faster than most spacecraft and simply collecting them. Within seconds, she was juggling. Actually juggling 3 balls of superheated plasma while dodging dozens more, all while wearing an expression of concentrated delight that suggested she was having the time of her life. "This is much better," she called out, tossing one of the plasma bolts higher than the others and catching it behind her back without looking. "I was starting to think you'd gone easy on me." The AI's response was to activate every weapon system simultaneously. The chamber erupted in a storm of energy that turned the air itself into a lethal obstacle. Plasma bolts, particle beams, and what appeared to be small guided missiles filled the space with enough destructive potential to level a city block. The noise was indescribable, like standing inside a hurricane made of explosions and powered by the collective rage of every frustrated military instructor in the galaxy. Through it all, Amber danced. She moved with impossible speed and equally impossible precision, turning what should have been certain death into an elaborate performance piece. Plasma bolts were caught, redirected, or simply seemed to forget they were supposed to be dangerous when they got too close to her. Particle beams bent around her like light around a black hole, and the guided missiles developed what could only be described as acute targeting dysfunction. In the observation deck, Brutus had stopped trying to understand what he was seeing and had moved on to the bargaining stage of grief. "This isn't possible," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "Humans don't. We can't. There's no way." Grok, meanwhile, had achieved a state of religious enlightenment and was quietly updating his personal theology to include the possibility that gods walked among them and attended military academy for fun. The barrage continued for exactly 93 seconds before the AI apparently decided that discretion was the better part of not being completely humiliated by a single cadet. The weapons powered down with what sounded suspiciously like electronic embarrassment. Amber stood in the center of the chamber, completely unharmed and looking mildly disappointed that the show was over. In her hands, she held what appeared to be a small sun made of compressed plasma energy, the combined result of every shot she'd caught, and somehow consolidated into a single stable sphere of death. "That was fun," she said, examining the plasma ball with professional interest. "But I think there might be a slight calibration issue with your targeting systems. They seemed a little sluggish." The AI's response was a sound that could only be described as electronic weeping. Brutus, his face having progressed through several shades of red and settled on a concerning purple, managed to find his voice. "Cadet," he called through the intercom, his words carefully measured. "Please report to debriefing immediately." "Sure thing, Commander." Amber tossed the plasma ball gently into the air, where it dissolved harmlessly into sparkles of light. "Should I run the course again, or are we good?" The silence that followed was the kind of silence that occurs when entire worldviews collapse, and reality needs a moment to reboot itself. "We're good," Brutus finally managed. "We're very, very good." As the chamber doors opened and Amber strolled out like she'd just finished a light workout instead of redefining the laws of physics, one thought echoed through the minds of everyone who'd witnessed the impossible. What in the galaxy's name was she, really? The debriefing room had all the charm of a tax audit conducted in a morgue. Amber sat in a chair that was definitely not designed for comfort, while Brutus paced back and forth like a caged predator who'd just discovered that his favorite prey had developed laser vision and a sense of humor. The other cadets had been dismissed to contemplate what they'd witnessed, and maybe update their wills, but their faces pressed against the corridor windows suggested they weren't going anywhere anytime soon. You couldn't blame them, really. When someone casually catches plasma bolts like they're juggling fruit, it tends to generate a certain amount of scientific curiosity. So, Brutus said, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone trying very hard not to have a complete psychological breakdown. Would you care to explain what exactly happened in there? Amber shrugged, the picture of casual innocence. I passed the test? I assume I passed. Nobody shot me, I didn't die horribly, and I'm pretty sure I hit all the performance metrics. Performance metrics? Brutus stopped pacing and fixed her with a stare that could have melted steel. Cadet, you just caught plasma bolts with your bare hands. You juggled them. You turned what should have been a massacre into a light show. Well, when you put it like that, it sounds kind of impressive, Amber admitted. But honestly, it wasn't that hard once I got the timing down. The targeting algorithms were pretty predictable. Standard Gaussian distribution, with a slight bias toward center mass. Basic stuff, really. Brutus sat down heavily in the chair across from her, looking like a man who'd just been told that everything he thought he knew about gravity was actually a practical joke. Basic stuff, he repeated slowly. Cadet, in 20 years of running this program, I've seen Voltarian shock troopers reduced to vapor. I've watched crystalline warriors shatter under the pressure. I've seen species that evolved on death worlds barely last 30 seconds in that chamber. Yeah, I heard about the casualty rate, Amber nodded sympathetically. Must be rough on the cleaning crew. And you just... Brutus made a vague gesture with his hands that might have been meant to represent juggling, or possibly the heat death of the universe. How? Here's where things get interesting, because Amber's expression shifted from casual amusement to something that might have been pity. Not mockery, not superiority, just the gentle sadness of someone who'd realized they were about to shatter some comfortable illusions. Commander, she said carefully, what exactly do you know about Earth? Earth? Brutus blinked at the apparent non sequitur. It's a backwater world in the outer rim. Class M planet, recent addition to the galactic community. Your people discovered faster-than-light travel about 50 years ago and still think reality television is entertainment. Standard developing civilization stuff. And what do you know about our evolutionary history? Standard. Humanoid development, I assume. Probably evolved from some kind of tree-dwelling omnivore. Developed tool use, built cities, discovered spaceflight. Same as half the species in the galaxy. Amber was quiet for a moment, and in that silence, something shifted in the room. It was subtle, maybe just a change in her posture, or the way the light seemed to catch her eyes differently, but suddenly, the comfortable assumptions about who was the predator and who was the prey didn't seem quite so clear-cut. Commander, she said gently, Earth isn't a developing world. It's a death world. The words hung in the air like a challenge to reality itself. Brutus stared at her, his brain clearly struggling to process what she'd just said. That's impossible, he managed. Death worlds don't produce spacefaring civilizations. The environmental pressures are too extreme. Nothing that evolves on a death world develops the cooperative instincts necessary for what? Amber interrupted. For society? For technology? For the kind of collaborative effort it takes to build starships and join galactic communities? She leaned forward slightly, and something in her smile suggested that this was where the lesson really began. Commander, what do you think it takes to survive on a world where the weather can kill you? The animals can kill you? The plants can kill you? And even the air can kill you if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. Brutus opened his mouth, then closed it again. The question had seemed rhetorical, but the way Amber was looking at him suggested she actually wanted an answer. Adaptation, he said finally. Rapid evolutionary development, enhanced survival instincts. Good, Amber nodded approvingly. What else? Cooperation? Pack hunting behavior? Excellent. What else? Enhanced healing factors? Improved stress response systems? You're getting warmer. What else? Brutus was quiet for a long moment, his expression growing increasingly troubled as the implications started to sink in. Intelligence, he said slowly. Problem-solving abilities. The capacity to learn from mistakes and adapt strategies quickly. And physical resilience, enhanced reflexes. The ability to process threats and respond faster than the threats can… Oh! His face had gone pale. Oh, holy stars and void spaces. You're not a developing species at all, are you? Amber's smile was kind, but there was something underneath it that suggested vast depths. Like looking into an ocean and suddenly realizing you couldn't see the bottom. Earth has a surface gravity of 9.8 meters per second squared, she said conversationally. That's about 30% higher than the galactic standard. Our atmosphere is roughly 21% oxygen, enough to make most species hyperventilate if they're not careful. We have tectonic plates that shift without warning, weather systems that can level cities, and a magnetic field that periodically reverses itself and bathes the planet in radiation. Brutus was staring at her now with the kind of fascination usually reserved for natural disasters and tax forms. Our oceans, Amber continued, are filled with creatures that can kill you in more ways than most species have words for. Our land masses host everything from microscopic parasites that can rewrite your genetic code to predators that can outrun ground vehicles. We have deserts that can cook you, forests that can poison you, and mountain ranges that can freeze you solid while simultaneously giving you altitude sickness. But your people, you built cities. You developed art, culture, technology. Yeah, we did. Amber's expression grew almost fond. You know what it takes to build a civilization on a world that's actively trying to kill you? Cooperation. Not just the let's work together when it's convenient kind of cooperation, but the if we don't all look out for each other, we all die horribly kind. The kind of cooperation that becomes so deeply ingrained in your species that you literally cannot function without it. She stood up and walked to the small window that looked out over the academy grounds. In the distance, alien cadets were running obstacle courses and practicing maneuvers, blissfully unaware that their understanding of the universe was about to require some major updates. We spent millions of years learning to work together, because the alternative was extinction, she said quietly. We developed empathy as a survival trait, because understanding what your teammates are thinking could mean the difference between life and death. We learned to communicate complex ideas quickly and efficiently, because there wasn't time for misunderstandings when the storm season hit. But the physical capabilities… Brutus's voice was barely a whisper. The speed, the reflexes, the ability to catch plasma bolts. Amber turned back to him, and for just a moment, her casual facade slipped. What showed through wasn't arrogance or superiority. It was something much more unsettling. It was restraint, the careful, controlled restraint of someone who'd spent their entire life learning to hold back. Commander, what do you think happens to a species that spends millions of years dodging lightning, outrunning avalanches, and fighting predators that can move faster than thought? What do you think happens to their reaction times? Their processing speed? Their ability to track multiple threats simultaneously? The silence stretched between them like a chasm. "We got fast," she said simply. "We got really, really fast. And we got very good at not showing it. Because on a death world, anything that makes you stand out is usually something that wants to eat you." Brutus was doing that thing people do when their brain is trying to process information that doesn't fit into any existing categories. His mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to form words. "The performance scores," he said slowly. 6 weeks of consistently finishing last in every category." "Yeah, about that." Amber had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Sorry about the deception, but there really wasn't a good way to explain it. Hey, Commander, I'm deliberately underperforming because my actual capabilities would probably cause a diplomatic incident. It just doesn't come up naturally in conversation." You were holding back this entire time." "Well, yeah. I mean, what was the alternative? Show up on day one, casually outperform everyone in physical trials by orders of magnitude, and then spend the next 6 weeks explaining to various governments why humans aren't actually the primitive species they thought we were." She shook her head. "Much easier to just blend in. Learn what I could, make some friends, and try not to break anything important. But the test, the crucible chamber, why reveal yourself now?" Amber was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Because," she said finally, "someone had to pass eventually, right? And I figured, if it's going to be anyone, might as well be someone who could actually survive the experience." "Survive?" Brutus repeated. "Cadet, you didn't just survive. You made it look easy. You made our most advanced weapons systems look like toys." "Well," Amber said with a slight smile, "they kind of are." The implications of that statement hit Brutus like a physical blow. If this was what humans considered easy, if their most advanced training scenarios were the equivalent of playground games to Earth's people, then what did that say about humanity's actual capabilities? "How many?" he asked quietly. "How many what? How many of you are there? How many humans like you?" Amber tilted her head, genuinely confused by the question. "Like me? Commander, I'm completely average by human standards. Maybe slightly below average, actually. I was never particularly good at sports back home." The debriefing room fell silent except for the sound of Brutus's worldview undergoing comprehensive structural collapse. Outside in the corridor, alien faces pressed against the windows had gone from curious to horrified as the full implications of what they'd witnessed began to sink in. They'd been training alongside what they thought was the weakest member of their class, only to discover that she'd been holding back enough firepower to revolutionize galactic warfare. And she was average. "Commander?" Amber's voice was gentle, concerned. "You're looking a little pale. Maybe you should sit down?" Brutus looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time saw past the careful facade of mediocrity to the truth underneath. The casual way she moved, like someone who'd never encountered a physical challenge she couldn't handle. The way her eyes tracked everything in her peripheral vision, constantly processing threats that didn't exist. The barely perceptible tension in her muscles, like a coiled spring holding back forces that could reshape the local space-time continuum. "Dear gods," he whispered, "what have we done?" "Sir? We've been training with you for 6 weeks, teaching you our tactics, our strategies, our capabilities." The color drained from his face as the full implications hit home. "We've been giving you a complete education in galactic military doctrine." Amber blinked innocently. "Well, yes. That was kind of the point of military academy, wasn't it? But now you know everything. Our strengths, our weaknesses, our standard operating procedures. Commander, Amber said gently, Earth has been part of the galactic community for 50 years. Did you really think we were just sitting around making reality TV shows the whole time? The silence that followed was the kind of silence that occurs when entire strategic paradigms shift and nobody's quite sure who the good guys are anymore. Oh, Brutus said faintly. Oh, we are so incredibly screwed. The Academy's main auditorium had seen many graduation ceremonies over the years, but none quite like this one. Brutus stood at the podium, looking like a man who'd spent the past week reevaluating every life choice that had led him to this moment. Behind him, the traditional banner reading, "Excellence Through Adversity," seemed almost quaint now, like a motivational poster in a tornado shelter. The surviving cadets sat in the front row, their expressions ranging from shell-shocked to philosophically enlightened. Helix had achieved a level of transparency that bordered on invisible, while Grok kept flexing his muscles and muttering prayers to warrior gods who were probably reconsidering their career choices. Lila flickered between dimensions, apparently trying to find one where the laws of physics still made sense. And Amber? Amber sat in her dress uniform, looking pleasantly attentive, like someone attending a mildly interesting lecture on agricultural policy. "Cadets," Brutus began, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom and impending existential dread. "Today marks the end of your training and the beginning of your service to the galactic community. You have learned discipline, tactics, and the value of sacrifice in service to something greater than yourselves." He paused, glancing at Amber, who gave him an encouraging smile that somehow made everything worse. "You have also learned," he continued carefully, "that sometimes our assumptions about the universe require adjustment. That strength comes in many forms, and that the most dangerous opponent is often the one who doesn't look dangerous at all." In the audience, Admiral Hawk leaned forward with interest. He'd heard rumors about the unprecedented events at the Academy, but the official reports had been so sanitized they might as well have been written in diplomatic poetry. "Cadet Amber," Brutus called out, "please step forward." Amber rose smoothly and walked to the podium with the casual grace of someone who'd never met a challenge she couldn't handle. The other cadets watched her with the fascination of scientists observing a particularly interesting form of controlled nuclear reaction. In 20 years of operation, Brutus announced, no cadet has ever successfully completed the crucible chamber exercise. Until now. He held up a small medal that caught the light like crystallized determination. For exceptional performance under fire, tactical innovation, and redefining our understanding of what's possible, I present you with the Academy's highest honor. As he pinned the medal to her uniform, Amber leaned close and whispered, "Thanks, Commander." "This was fun." "Fun," he repeated quietly. "Right, Cadet. I have to ask, what's next for you?" Amber's smile widened. "Well, I've been accepted into an advanced program back home, something about applied xenopolitical dynamics and interstellar diplomatic relations. Should be interesting." The blood drained from Brutus's face as he realized what that meant. Earth wasn't just hiding their military capabilities. They were actively studying galactic politics, learning who was allied with whom, understanding the delicate balance of power that kept the peace. "Advanced program," he managed. "On Earth." "Yep. Apparently, they've got some really cutting-edge facilities there. State-of-the-art training equipment, full immersion tactical simulators, the works." She paused thoughtfully. "Oh, and I should probably mention, I wasn't the only human in this year's applicant pool. The auditorium went very, very quiet. "There are others," Admiral Hawke called out from the audience, his voice carrying just a hint of panic. "Oh, sure," Amber replied cheerfully. "About 200 of us scattered across various academies throughout the galaxy. Cultural exchange programs, you know. Really helps build understanding between species." Brutus closed his eyes and counted to 10 in 3 different languages, none of which had words adequate for his current situation. "Cadet," he said finally, "hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to discuss Earth's intentions regarding galactic relations, who would they talk to?" "Well," Amber said, "I suppose they could always visit. Earth's always been big on hospitality. We love having guests over for dinner." Her smile took on a quality that suggested dinner might involve more than just pleasant conversation. "I'm sure our diplomatic corps would be thrilled to talk." As the ceremony concluded and the cadets dispersed to their new assignments, Brutus remained at the podium, staring at the Academy's motto, and wondering if they should update it to something more accurate. Like, "Excellence through abject terror," or "We have no idea what we're doing." Amber paused at the auditorium door and looked back. "Oh, Commander? Thanks for everything. The training was genuinely helpful. I learned a lot about galactic military doctrine. I'm sure my instructors back home will find it very educational." And with that, she walked out into the wider galaxy, leaving behind a group of very thoughtful military officers who were suddenly in desperate need of new strategic planning sessions and possibly stronger alcohol. In the distance, Earth waited patiently, its children scattered among the stars like seeds in fertile soil, learning, growing, and preparing for whatever came next, with the patient confidence of a species that had spent millions of years turning a death world into home. The galaxy, as they say, was about to get very interesting indeed.